Listen up, this is a Porsche Macan S and this a GTS, the top two offerings in the Macan lineup. And what I'm going to try and figure out is how are these different, and maybe more importantly, how much faster, if at all, is the GTS compared to the S?
Ah yes, the Porsche Macan S and GTS. In 2021, Porsche decided to drop the turbo model and now the GTS reigns supreme. But how much more supreme is it than the S? Well, before I start to answer that, let me quickly identify these examples I have today. Since both cars are in white and have identical interiors in red, the easiest way to distinguish them is by the wheels. The GTS is equipped with these beautiful 21-inch wheels and the S has 20s. Here's the spec for the S, and notice it doesn't have the sport tailpipes, upgraded exhaust, or air suspension. So that should be interesting when comparing the driving dynamics to the GTS.
Alright, so let's start it off with the engine, and they both come equipped with the same 2.9 liter twin turbocharged V6 with a notable and highly questioned difference in horsepower and torque. Highly questioned because there's some talk out there that the S is just as fast as the GTS, even though it's down almost 60 horsepower. And more to come on that here in a minute.
Now let's go through some of the major differences quickly so we can get to the driving. The brakes, the GTS comes with these cool looking Porsche surface coated brakes or PSCBs versus the regular steels in the S. The suspension, the S comes with PASM but with a fixed ride height, the GTS with air suspension. The GTS also gets the sport exhaust system with black painted tips, which look rather cool, and the S just the regular quad tips, which still look cool either way. Finally, aesthetically, the GTS has a unique front fascia, gets sport designed side skirts, clear LEDs, and finally unique 21-inch RS wheels, which this car is obviously not equipped with, but unique is marginal because you can get the same wheels on the S, you just can't get them in all black.
So beyond just a couple minor aesthetic differences on the interior, they're mostly the same in there. So let's move to the bigger question and see if we can feel the difference in power, handling, and sound by driving these cars back to back on the same road. Alright, so I'm driving the Macan S first. I'll give you my overall impressions of it and contrast it to the GTS when I drive it right afterwards. So with that, let's go ahead and turn this thing on and see what it's about. A little exhaust check with sport on. Not bad. So let's go for a quick spin in the S. And just for your own information, I have already reviewed the GTS, but that was some time ago, so I wanted to give the S a fair shake and drive them back to back to give the, I guess, closest impression of the two. So sport mode was already on for that exhaust check earlier. Now I'm going to put the chassis in Sport Plus as well, and let's immediately test what this thing has as far as its acceleration. Now remember, 375 horsepower, 383 torque in the Macan S. So I'm going to leave it in first manual shift mode, get a little straight. Oh wow. Wow, that's surprising. It's got a nice shove right there. Initially, brakes are good. Remember, these are the standard brakes. Downshift to 2, mash. Oh, it's got a nice exhaust pop on the upshift. So that's really nice. Oh, this is pretty quick. Downshift again. PDK, of course, is wonderful. Brakes are nice. Let's get some more acceleration here just from second. Oh yeah, this is plenty quick. Now remember, 0 to 60 in this is 4.6 seconds. If you had Sport Chrono, which this car does not have, it would drop it down to 4.4. And contrasting that to the GTS, GTS is 4.3 with 4.1 in Sport Chrono. So initially I can tell you that this is pretty engaging to drive. It's properly quick, and the exhaust note, for being the standard exhaust, still sounds really good. The one thing that I do miss is I don't have the ability to just leave it in manual shift mode in the Macan S, and it's rather annoying because it kind of just switches by itself. I need to engage the paddles for it to stay in manual shift mode, but that's a minor nitpicking thing. So let me talk to you about the brakes very quickly. The brakes are good as well. They've got a nice bite right at the top of the pedal, so they give you ample amount of braking feel and braking power. Now let's switch over into the chassis. Remember, this is PASM with fixed shocks, no air shocks like in the GTS. And it's actually really nice to drive this car. And the setup is wonderful, and let me tell you why. Now, there's no hiding the size and the weight of the Macan. It's just a mid-size or a compact SUV. So when you give it sudden inputs, the weight transfer is just there naturally. But when you compare it to other SUVs that I've driven and look at it by itself from the SUV scope, it is still properly sporty, as most Porsche cars are. And then when you switch it over into comfort, it really soaks up the bumps, and it's really, really nice to drive. I would imagine this thing would be absolutely wonderful to drive on a daily basis and just cruise around, go to work, come back, go have nice dinners, and pick up your kids, take them back home. So there's no question as far as the overall comfort. And if you're wondering, I am sitting in a 14-way seat, which are absolutely wonderful by themselves and just add on to that overall comfort that you get driving this car. All right, let's get one final send off. Oh, this is still properly fast. Oh, it's really good. This is nice. And that wasn't even in sport mode. I just hammered it just to see what it's like. Yeah, this is good. This is plenty fast enough for daily driving and to get your blood pumping as well. So that's basically it for the S. Now let's switch into the GTS and see what that has to offer. All right, so as promised, in the GTS now, let's go ahead and turn this thing on and go for a spin. The exhaust, quick check with the mufflers closed. Now open. You can tell a little bit of a difference, definitely there. More noticeable when you're driving. So speaking of that, let's go ahead. And the first thing you're going to notice when you jump from the S into the GTS is how much more resistant and how much more weight there is in the steering feedback. It's immediately noticeable, and I think Porsche has done that on purpose, so you jump in and you can feel the difference immediately on your hands or in your hands. So now let's test that speed difference. So 343 horsepower, 405 torque in this. And the difference, I do have the exhaust baffles, I do have Sport Chrono in this car, but to be fair to the Macan S, I'm not going to use launch control, I'm not going to use Sport Response. So suspension in its lowest setting, exhaust baffles open, and Sport Plus. Strangely, the paddle shifters are not working in this Macan, so that's a shame. But anyway, let's see what the GTS has. Very quick. Very, very quick. Okay, unfortunately, I can't downshift, so I'm just gonna mash it. It won't downshift a second. This is so fast. This is such a fast thing. It's such a shame that I cannot use the paddle shifters. It's so aggravating. But let's get one thing very clear here. The GTS is definitely faster than the S. The exhaust note also is a lot more engaging with the Sport muffler. You get more noise inside of the car on upshifts and on downshifts. There's a lot more aggressive pop coming in. And the area where you notice the speed difference or the acceleration the most is right after 4,000 RPM. Of course, once the turbos have spooled up and you've got full power, or getting close to full power at least, it pulls harder to redline in the GTS. Let's go again here. See, it just upshifted. Oh yeah. Oh, this is such a quick car. Yeah. And as I was saying, so it pulls much harder. You see that needle jumping a lot quicker to the 7,000 or close to 7,000 RPM redline. But it's not drastic. it really isn't that drastic. It's faster. You can tell it's definitely faster. But I think another thing that's contributing to the Macan GTS feeling faster than the S is the sport mufflers. Because of that engagement, the more noise that you get with the sport mufflers, it tingles your senses in a different way, and that in and of itself heightens the feel of speed. And yeah, it's just a compounding effect. Of course, it does have 60 more horsepower on paper, or 59 on paper, but when you add that sport response and that exhaust noise in, it just adds on to it and it feels faster, but again, not drastically faster. Now, some of the other differences, I'm gonna go ahead and put it in normal mode, and the brakes. So I can tell you that the surface coated brakes are a little bit more aggressive, and they do have more stopping power, absolutely. At initial tip in, you get a lot bigger bite, and when you're really into the brake, there's a lot more power there. Of course, you would expect that as standard in the GTS because it's a lot faster. You need more braking power in this car, and it definitely delivers it. There's no question that there's a lot more braking power in the surface coated brakes. And of course, additional benefits: no rust or no dust. Now, the suspension, and this is where there's the biggest difference between the two cars, the GTS and the S. So in sport mode, or in Sport Plus mode with the car in its lowest setting, this car absolutely is 100% stiffer and sportier than the S. Remember in the S, I was telling you how the Macan is an SUV and it's difficult to hide all of the weight, and when you give it sudden inputs, the weight transfer is immediately apparent. Well, in this, it's so much better managed. It definitely feels flatter when I give it sudden inputs, even in the normal mode, and especially in Sport Plus with the lowest ride height. This is hands down the biggest difference between those two cars is the handling dynamics. Now, when I switch it into comfort mode, I gotta say that the S is more comfortable and softer riding than the GTS. And if I had to put a number on it, I would say between 10 and 15%. It's not drastic. Anytime I've driven a car with air suspension, it's magic. In the softest setting, it's super soft and super supple. And then in its hardest setting with the adaptive shocks in Sport Plus mode, it's really, really sporty. And I think Porsche has done that on purpose. They've tuned it a little to be stiffer. And of course, this is the GTS model. They don't want it to be the most comfortable. This is the top of the line and the sportiest. Hence, it's not as comfortable as the S, and I really don't think it should be. So that's the Macan S and GTS. When looked at independently, these two cars are absolutely wonderful. But what about the magic question? Is the GTS faster than the S? And the simple answer is yes, it is, but really only marginally. So does marginally equate to a $14,500 price difference? Well, it depends. If you're planning on buying most or all of the options that come standard in the Macan GTS in your S, then you might as well go with the GTS because there's more value there. Otherwise, just spec in the air suspension and the sport exhaust, and that way you'll get most of the differences that are contributed to feel between the two cars. And you'll save a couple $1,000s along the way. So that's all I've got. If you've got any questions, please make sure you leave me a comment down below or send me a message on Instagram @DriveSteady. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.